Suzanne, let me ask you. You in the book, you write out what you believe the three tenets of feminism are. You cite them as: number one, feminists are imprisoned by their negative view of women and their place in the world around them. Number two, all of the injustices perpetuated on women through the centuries. The most oppressive on women is that women must have babies and men do not. That's the third. And the third one, there's no difference between males and females other than their sex organs. That's what you say feminists believe today, and have tried to, convince other Americans believing. Walker. But Suzanne Venke, I mean, in your words, what do you see is the problem with feminism? Why do you call it the worst thing ever to happen to American women?
Yeah, and I use that example because that is such a important story, and it's not just her story. It's so many people's story. And what we're really left with when it comes to feminism is not just that issue that she's referring to with struggle having children later in life, but also this notion that women today owe feminists for everything. Now, you might have noticed when this article was published in BU Today a week ago, and there were so many comments, negative comments, of course, from people on campus. The overwhelming theme in those comments was something to the effect of, how do Suzanne, and Phyllis for that matter, think they are able to get published in the first place? Or how is it that they can disparage a movement that is what allowed them to get college degrees and become authors? Now, that was very telling, because that is exactly the message that young people are getting about feminism, that we as women today owe feminists for those things. But in fact, we do not. And if we did, I mean, if that were the case, then how is it that my grandmother in 1920 had a college degree? How is it that my mother, who's now 80, has a master's degree and went into the male-dominated field of, she was a stockbroker, not way before, but during the 50s, before the 60s movement got off the ground. So there is a lot of information in this book that is contrary to the information,
making them think that they need to live their lives in a certain way. And why is that? Why do you think that it's so all-pervasive through American society?
There is a chasm in America, essentially, between the powerful and the not so powerful. I'll call them everyday Americans. We know from the research that everyday Americans are largely a right-of-center bunch. We also know that those in the media are largely not a right-of-center bunch. And because of that, the views on all areas of our lives, whether it's education, sex, work, motherhood, you name it, all those important aspects of life are getting filtered through a left-wing lens.
Well, except that there's a lot of very powerful, I mean, Rush Limbaugh has huge numbers of listeners that, put, I'll even admit it, our own listeners, our own listener numbers in a shadow. So I think you're identifying parts of the media here.
Well, what I'm referring to specifically, what we call the feminist elite. And the feminist elite they reside in three areas: academia, as evidenced by the responses from the article at Boston University last week, and in Hollywood and in the media. And most people, especially young people, are exposed on a routine basis to these women, first in college, then in the media via television, magazines, and in Hollywood. So the messages that they're getting are consistently coming from this one place. And that message conflicts with what I believe will lead them to a happy place, and will go along with the value system that they have for themselves. And they need a voice, and that's really where Flipside comes in. I got several emails as a result of that article at BU from students at BU young girls who thanked me profusely because they feel like they have nowhere to go. That's what I'm all about. I'm for those people who don't have a voice.
And, what was interesting to me in the book is that, you spend quite a bit of time really, going after, for example, Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, the biggest names in what's popularly known as second wave feminism. And a lot of your arguments against them, to be honest, they sort of struck me as you going after an antiquated notion of feminism, like one that's sort of frozen in amber from the 60s and 70s, and that maybe a lot of women, and maybe it's not very many anymore, but those women who think about feminism today don't actually subscribe to those same notions from, the 60s and 70s, and you're attacking something that doesn't really exist anymore.
Well, can you give me an example of what you mean?
Well, when you say that, I have a quote here, you say that, for if I wasn't a feminist, well, you're describing what people who are feminists today think. You say, for if I wasn't a feminist, downgrading the role of wife and mother and planning an exciting career to liberate me from the home, well, then I must be conservative. And it was this, when you say, it seems like you're saying that feminists still think that liberation means being free from men, free from the home, and, free from the shackles that society has put on them. And I wonder if more women today don't see it as liberation, but just as a natural part of the totality of what they want to experience in their lives.
Well, that would be fine, because I would define that the same way myself, totality of what I want to experience. There's a lot of things I want to do in my life, and I explain in the book that women, it's a very positive book, that women can have it all if they sequence their lives. But if that were true, that it wasn't, if what you said was true, then why is it that many women in college who aspire to have marriage and motherhood at the center of their lives feel that they cannot say that out loud without being attacked, or maybe not attacked, but looked at funny? It is not PC to talk about getting married and having babies when you're in college. That is a fact. And the reality of that does stem from something, and it stems from feminism, because feminism at its outset in the 1960s was about demeaning motherhood. Now, we can go back and forth on this all day long, but it's in the book very clearly how it all began, and all the research and the backup for that research is there. So it's sort of like it's snowballed. That's kind of what I'm getting at. That anything that starts there is going to eventually, you say something often enough, over and over and over again, and it just becomes part of the culture. And there's so many people that today, they don't think of themselves as feminists. They don't even use that term. But their lives have been a direct result of the feminist culture and the influence of feminism on their life, often without even knowing it. Feminism absolutely means different things to different people, and one of the things that we talk about on Flipside is that today feminism is discussed in three parts, essentially: first wave, second wave, and third wave. The first wave being the suffragette movement of the 19th century, then the second wave being the Betty Friedan 1960s period, and then the third wave being today. I think the most outspoken feminist today is Jessica Valenti, and she has a organization or website called Feministing, and they represent the third wave feminists. And she gave the definition, a working definition for feminism, just several months ago in the Washington Post. So when I go to the definition for feminism, I go right to the source, to the feminist. I mean, they should know what their own organization or movement is. So, one source, but it's the current. That certainly that represents third wave, and that goes hand in hand with second wave. However, it does not go hand in hand with first wave. So there is no real comparison between the suffragette movement and the feminist movement in the 1960s. The feminists in the 1960s just piggybacked off of that earlier movement that virtually every sane person would agree with in terms of the right to vote, and called that women's rights and said that they were continuing forth with that initial movement. But in fact, the early feminists, if you want to call them that, the suffragettes, were not pro-choice and were very family-oriented women. So those two agendas are very different. Yeah, the distinction there is wonderful. I think that focusing on oppression for women in third world countries or worldwide is a fantastic place for feminists to focus their attention. Hillary Clinton right now has taken on an assignment for that very thing, and I think that the focus should be over there as opposed to here, because the problem is comparing American women to women in other countries and suggesting that we are all sort of equally oppressed, and that's kind of that there's still more work to be done here, as though we are not fully finished with the movement when I'm saying essentially we are. Focus on the real oppression. That's great.
And then I read in the end of your book, here are what you call are the non-negotiables in terms of the solutions to the problem that you see. You say, 1, casual sex is a dead-end street. 2, marriage is the ultimate goal and divorce should not be assumed to be an option. And 3, children need, deserve, and want to be raised by their own parents. Experience.
I agree, and I think that Flipside does that. I think that it absolutely, while you call it black and white, but those 3 non-negotiables in the end aren't designed to be viewed as black and white. They're designed to give assistance, really, help in planning your life in a way that will ultimately bring you, or I should say allow you to have it all in a way that the current message that you get from the culture doesn't allow. And so I'm saying essentially, ignore the culture and the way they're telling you to do things. If you do it this way, you have a better chance to get what you want, which...
Very liberal. I'm getting my master's degree, and when I say I'm getting my master's degree and I have someone, that I'm in love with and I want to marry, I hope you don't do that before you finish your master's degree. You can put having kids, later in life. And I feel guilty, I have to admit, saying that I would think about becoming engaged or having kids or getting married and putting off getting my master's degree because people look at me weird. They think, why would you ever do that? Why wouldn't you get your schooling and your career underway? Well, I'm going to be 35 or 40 by the time I get settled into my career.
Shared by a lot, the sort of conflict that people feel. Suzanne, we've just got a couple minutes left, and I want to ask you one last question about, how what Americans are feeling, American women in this day and age, because you write very eloquently in the book about sexual promiscuity and the problems and the pressures that young women feel there. But you also write that there's growing pushback, that, a lot of young women are saying, no, I don't want to be sexually promiscuous. What are you still so afraid of from feminism?
I'm not afraid of feminism. I'm pointing out what's going on, and people want that and need that information so that they can begin to think differently about their lives. The fact that women want to be married, or Americans still want to be married, is a great thing. The problem is we have an issue with marriage in this country, and so there's a gap between what they're saying they want to do and the messages that they get from the culture.